مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. أم واحد وينتخب ملايين أمريكيين الرئيس القادم. من سيكون رئيس الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية؟ الخيارات تزداد وضوحا مع الوقت. عملية اختيار المرشحين في كلا الحزبين الجمهوري والديمقراطي لا تزال خطواتها تمضي قدما. فبالنسبة للديمقراطيين لم يتبقى منهم سوى 3 مرشحين. ستكون واحدة منهم وزيرة الخارجية الأمريكية السابقة هيلاري كلينتون، ولن يكون أحدهم نائب الرئيس جو بايدن. بالنسبة للجمهوريين عملية اختيار المرشح عملية أكثر تأكيدا. بدأ الحزب بعدد كبير من المرشحين يفوق عدد الديمقراطيين، نحو 15 مرشحا. لا يزال معظمهم يتصارع في هذا السباق. على رأس هذه القائمة أشخاص ليسوا سياسيين، منهم رجل أعمال شهير وطبيب مرموق. مرشحون يختلفون اختلافا تاما من أي من الديمقراطيين. لمناقشة التغييرات في معلم السباق الرئاسي ومقترن بالتغييرات في مقر البرلمان، يسعدني أن أرحب بلجنتنا المكونة من الخبيرين السياسيين ستيف كليمنز وريبيكا بيرغ. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting here with our panel of political experts, Rebecca Berg and Steve Clemens. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So there's a lot of politics going on in America right now. Let's start with what's going on Capitol Hill, where there's some very interesting things. First, he didn't want to be the leader of the House, but now he is. Who is Paul Ryan, and how did he get to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives?
Well, he's a former vice presidential nominee. He ran on the Republican ticket with Mitt Romney in 2012. More recently, he's been the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which is one of the more powerful committees in Congress, deals with taxation, healthcare, all of the really big hot button issues. And now we see he is going to be the next Speaker of the House. He didn't want this job because running the Ways and Means Committee was his dream job. He's very much a policy wonk. He cares about the issues. He's not really in this out of any personal ambition to be, to rise to, the level of Speaker of the House or any other of these big positions in government. He really wanted to focus on tax reform as the Ways and Means Committee chairman, but Republicans found themselves in a position where they didn't have anyone with the gravitas who could unify the Republican conference and get enough votes really to have a unified speakership. And so Paul Ryan was forced kind of out of duty to step in. And now he's actually, I think, excited about it.
Steve, tell us a bit what's going on here. Republicans, or certain Republicans, devoured John Boehner, and then they devoured Kevin McCarthy, who was the heir to John Boehner. Why are they devouring their own, and will they devour Paul Ryan?
Well, I think they may very well devour Paul Ryan. I think right now they're trying to create an illusion that they won't necessarily right away. But the instability and fractures within the Republican Party have not gone away. They remain deep and dark and troubled. There are about 40 members of the House in what they call the Freedom Caucus who are very committed to a much more shock and awe type of politics that never gives up and never surrenders on all of the policy issues they care about, which frequently are fiscal issues, but it goes beyond that. And so they have no compunction about shutting down the government if the government doesn't come forward with an immediately balanced budget, for instance. And these are the kinds of things that John Boehner and other leaders felt in their position they had to negotiate and compromise on. And on the other hand, Paul Ryan, this 45-year-old policy wonk from Wisconsin who had the job he wanted and was trying to turn his committee into a think tank, played the Julius Caesar role where he kept saying, I won't do it unless I get this. And he turned it down several times and then finally gave in by issuing demands and getting a certain number of things in place he feels where they've promised not to undermine him in the next couple of years, at least to give him time not to run a motion against his leadership. My sense is that while all but 9 of those 40 members supported his candidacy, it remains very fragile because the politics that we're seeing are not just politics between members, they're constituents in the country who expect and demand certain behaviors from the people they've elected. And lining up behind Paul Ryan is not something I think is going to last long. So I suspect that we're going to see all of the great drama of instability in the GOP come back again soon.
One of the things working in his favor, though, as he begins as Speaker, is on the way out, Speaker John Boehner passed a big budget deal that basically takes off the table debt limit raises, which have been part of the concern in the Republican conference, and one of the reasons we see crisis after crisis in the Republican Party on Capitol Hill, because every time we need to raise the debt limit, which is the borrowing limit for the United States to borrow money, Republicans have been asking for concessions, and so then we run into a crisis where maybe we're going to default on our loans. So that's now off the table, and that will help Paul Ryan.
So that's clear till March of 2017, so they've got a little time.
But I was going to ask you about this. So there's a big budget deal, no budget fight for the next year and a half, no debt limit fight for a year and a half. Congress really did something quite positive. Is there a glimmer of hope here that maybe under the Ryan speakership we'll actually get positive things done?
There might be. I mean, as Steve pointed out, this is still a very fragile environment in the Republican conference in the House and just on Capitol Hill in general. And there are still very divided factions within the Republican conference in the House. You have establishment guys who are very angry at the Freedom Caucus and what they have done, and what they see as intransigence. And the Freedom Caucus is really not looking to become any more moderate in the coming days.
And we've seen things like Planned Parenthood and trying to defund Planned Parenthood and the federal role in that. That has been attached to some of these budget and continuing resolutions attempts in the past, and they'll find other vehicles to raise that agenda. We've got media outlets like Breitbart News that really, really hate Paul Ryan, and every day they hammer at another problem that he's got. And it was interesting that Paul Ryan in his speakership said to the House that Republicans should pray for Democrats, Democrats should pray for Republicans, not for conversion, but for deeper understanding. And that made a lot of the Freedom Caucus angry. So that's the level there. And so no matter if the budget deals have been taken off the table and we'll have a little bit more fiscal balance and sort of less drama in that arena, there are so many other areas for drama to sort of impede progress that I don't want to think it's all just sort of warm and fuzzy. We're going to have fun in the next 18 months.
All right, well, look, if Paul Ryan just became the top-ranking Republican in the line of presidential succession, there are quite a few other Republicans who want to jump over that and become president themselves. Let's first talk about a group of Republican candidates who aren't politicians at all and who seem to be doing remarkably well in the presidential primary season. Two top of the list, Ben Carson, neurosurgeon, Donald Trump, flamboyant businessman. Why are Republican voters, or at least primary voters, saying they support one of these guys, neither of whom held any elective office before, to be president of the United States?
Well, that's actually part of it, that they haven't held elected office before. That's really appealing to Republican voters in this election cycle. This inexperience in politics, someone who's completely fresh to the political scene and hasn't wanted to be a politician prior to this. They see them as someone who would kind of shake up the dynamic in Washington, D.C. Whether they could actually do that is another question, but that's a big part of the appeal when it comes to Ben Carson and Donald Trump, who are two very unconventional candidates.
I think there's a real rejection out there, and I think it runs in both parties, frankly, but right now it's more potent in the Republican Party against professional politicians. And so we've got Ben Carson, who's an accomplished neurosurgeon, as you said. He looks something like a regular guy. People who are regular folk think, wow, maybe we can aspire. You used to sort of think, that your son or daughter could grow up to be president of the United States. And when you see people like Ben Carson running, it makes you feel like that might be true again. That you don't have to be in that way. Donald Trump is the billionaire, the flamboyant billionaire. People want his life. He sort of, even though he's not really self-made, he has this way of making the weather around himself that I think some people find very interesting. And then, of course, the third person we haven't talked about is Carly Fiorina, who's in that mix as well, as someone who ran a big company, and she's challenging the guys in the old boy network, because Washington looks deeply structurally corrupt to many Americans across both parties and to independents. But right now, the Republicans are ferocious about it.
But look, let me ask both of you, in all seriousness, is this for real, or is this just a passing moment of hubris among Republican primary voters, letting it out of their system?
Is it real?
And then they're eventually going to come back and they'll vote for some politician, as we've done for 200 and some odd years.
Well, I was just in Florida last week watching Donald Trump at 2 rallies in Miami and Jacksonville, 2 very big Florida cities, and he is drawing thousands of people to these rallies.
In Rubio land and Bush land, right?
Right, the home state of 2 of the people we thought would be front runners, Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush, and they're kind of stalling in the polls instead as Donald Trump has been on the rise. And his supporters are passionate. They get very excited to see him. This is for real. And we're finally at the point in this primary. It's taken months of Donald Trump being atop the polls nationally and in some of these key early primary states, but we're finally at the point where Republicans are taking him seriously now. There are Republican strategists I talk to who say he could absolutely win the nomination.
The real story is, at the end of the day, I think in my gut that some of the professional politicians and the machinery in the Republican Party will discipline towards someone who has competencies that a Ben Carson or a Donald Trump doesn't have. But you have to say we've never seen this before. That's the other element here. You have to punctuate that comment with, we've never seen the sustained support behind a candidate. Last time we did this, the GOP rotated through candidates. You know, you had somebody up and down every week. And they came and went. And you have a big field, but the consolidation of the anti-establishment crowd, about 50 to 60% of the likely GOP voters behind 3 people who are not of this town or of this political world, is a very, very interesting thing, and I think it needs to be taken seriously. At the end of the day, what you see happening is Trump is beginning to decline, Ben Carson is beginning to, so you may get into that revolving flavor of the month candidacy eventually. And you're beginning to see people like Marco Rubio begin to show some promise and come up, and that may then become the establishment candidate versus the non-establishment.
So we're going to come back in a minute to talk about the establishment guys, but Trump and Carson, are they competing basically for the same vote, the Republican protest vote? Do they have the same voters behind them?
I think right now that's clearly the case, because they seem to be not increasing the pie at all. Amongst the 3 major non-establishment candidates. Those numbers remain very static and have remained static for a long time. Their share of that pie within keeps moving, and so I don't think, it seems to me clear that they are competing.
But if you look at Donald Trump and Ben Carson and their combined polling right now, they're eating up about 50% of the Republican vote nationally, which is not insignificant. And so it's not just protest voters. This is a very diverse sample, actually, of the Republican Party. You have evangelical voters, the very religious voters in places like Iowa. You have people who identify as moderates who are supporting Donald Trump. If you look at polling, people say, I'm a moderate Republican, but I still support him.
Are evangelicals supporting Trump, who is probably the poster boy for the opposite of everything that evangelicals stand for?
To a lesser extent than Ben Carson. Ben Carson is leading for sure among evangelicals.
With the nice guy evangelical crowd. What I should have said, while they are competing for the same elements of frustrated people, what is really interesting about Donald Trump, and to explain some of his resilience, is that he's pulling equally across from groups across socioeconomic status and pulling equally across race. When you kind of get at and you break out, who are supporting these groups, Trump's support is sort of a sliver of every group. It's unusual.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about the establishment fighting back and who that might be. And then on the Democratic side as well, the establishment had a good week with Hillary Clinton resurgent a bit in the Democratic race to be their nominee. In just a moment. let me introduce again our panel. First is Rebecca Berg. Rebecca is a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, a daily Bible for anyone interested in politics and elections in America, and around the world for that matter. Sitting to her left is Steve Clemens. Steve is the Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic and editor of Atlantic Live. He is also a senior fellow and founder of the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation. The other fascinating theme in Republican presidential primary politics is this fight between the new establishment and the old establishment, if you will. Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, two guys from Florida, two guys who speak Spanish, but yet two guys who are fighting it out for the same vote, it seems. What's going on?
Absolutely. Well, both of them have really yet to make a splash in this primary. We're starting to see Marco Rubio on the rise, and this week there was the third Republican debate so far of this primary, and he had really what I would consider a breakout moment. He went head-to-head with Jeb Bush, and in an argument over his Senate voting record, came out on top. So Marco Rubio is in a really good position of having been sort of underrated for the duration of this primary, now showing that he might have the strength and the staying power to make it through this nominating process. But Jeb Bush, interestingly, is in kind of the opposite situation. He started this race as many people considered the front runner of the Republican primary. He had more money than anyone. He had his last name. His dad and his brother have both been presidents. And so there's a big donor network that comes with that, and also just a network of built-in support. But he has shown that he is a very uneven candidate. He doesn't have the charisma his brother had. He makes mistakes on the campaign trail. And so his support is actually on the downslope now.
Do you think that Marco Rubio is going to emerge as the representative of everybody but Trump, Carson?
He has the chance to. There are a couple of other parts of the puzzle that remain interesting, because we're going to have a lot more debates, and so people are going to have time to, see and sense how these folks think. But clearly, I agree that Marco Rubio had a breakout moment. But when you look at how he frames himself in the structure of it, and the way we're all trained to look at these candidates, in a deeper way than just what we see on TV, Jeb Bush has $100 million in the bank, and is spending it fast and cutting that back. And he looks like a John McCain character who could come out, go into a cave somewhere, and then come back out, because he definitely has more assets that could potentially be arranged to be supportive. But he looks like he's in pain every time he does. Rubio is hungry, wants this, moving it, but he doesn't have the big national legs that Jeb Bush does. The one that I find interesting out there that's lurking, that's not getting talked about, but he's running a really smart campaign, is Ted Cruz. Nobody can think of Ted Cruz as an establishment candidate, but he's behaving as someone who's almost like Silky Sullivan, a famous racehorse in America that would hang out in the back of the pack and then come up. And you see him raising the hardest to get dollars. He's got more of the tough dollars that are coming to his campaign than anyone. He's not just relying on billionaires in the background. And so Cruz could be a surprise in a way that we're not expecting, as we're distracted by the Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio. And then you have John Kasich, because at the end of the day, if you maintain this clutter and confusion, I've always been interested in dark horse politics, so the other person who comes out. And Kasich, at the end of the day, may be the one who appeals more to independents at the end of the day, and the Republican Party says, we want to beat Hillary Clinton, and that's our only pathway to do so. So you've got a couple of other players that I find very interesting beyond Marco Rubio.
What is so interesting to me, though, about Jeb Bush's money, it's something we talk about all the time, because this is conventionally a metric that tends to predict who could be the nominee for a party. But Jeb Bush's campaign and his affiliated super PAC have been spending this money, starting to spend this money on advertisements in Iowa, New Hampshire, some of the very important primary states, and it's not moving the needle for him. So I think that's a really bad sign.
Yeah, Jeb looks like, remember the TV actor in early American movies, you'll have to explain this. Jimmy Stewart went to Washington to clean it up. He's very earnest. He wants everyone to take this seriously, and that's Jeb Bush, and that's just not modern politics. And so I feel like, while he's got a lot of money and he may stay in the race, he just, the painful expressions that we see, where he actually said, oh, I have so many other things to do than to be demonized in the media and to be forced to demonize others. And then he had to do that by taking on Marco Rubio in the recent debate, challenging his voting record in the United States Senate. And Rubio called him on it. And so I think there are these elements, these moments that are showing that Jeb Bush doesn't have the sizzle and the secret sauce to be president of the United States.
Okay, so we're left with Hillary Clinton and everyone else. And the events of the last couple of weeks, former Secretary of State Clinton did very well in a debate. She did well at a congressional testimony on Benghazi. She looks more dominant today than at any point so far in the election. Is this good to be almost all alone at the top for a long, long time? The election is more than a year away, what do you think is going through the minds of Hillary Clinton?
I think that Hillary Clinton is probably pretty happy with where she is right now, actually, because when your primary is essentially a two-person race, you want to be on top, absolutely. And her campaign is just a juggernaut compared to what Bernie Sanders has put together. She is a juggernaut.
Okay, so we have one real race and one no race at all.
That's right.
And so we'll be back to talk about at least the real race in the weeks ahead. Thank you very much for joining us today on Dakhel, Washington.
Thank you.
بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول عملية اختيار المرشحين الرئاسيين، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.